Welcome to episode 3 of the Liz McMullen Show. Today, my guest is author and musician J.D. Glass. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, there were 2 books in particular that stuck in my brain for you, like that you had written, Punk Like Me and Red Light.
Okay.
And the reason why I've chosen those 2 is because I did things ass backwards and read Red Light first. And it was so awesome, and it had me by the short hair. So I'm like, I have to buy everything this woman has written.
I'm really glad you enjoyed Red Light. It was a hell of a ride to write.
Oh my God, exactly. Things are rough enough as it is. Adding in that little supernatural element was definitely something.
Well, that supernatural element, to me and among my friends and peers, there's nothing supernatural about that. That's life. Mm-hmm. So, everything's connected. Everything's connected. Everyone's connected. That's also a fact of life. So considering the way that I've created the world that, Nina and Samantha and Fran and Tori and, Jean live in, it's only natural to include that, how those connections work and what they reveal, what they mean, to each other.
Yeah, and going along a similar vein, there are vampiric-like people, who suck not necessarily blood, but suck the life out of your soul. And there are people who, have like a deleterious effect, and at the same time, there are those who just like warm you from the inside out. And like Nina's a wonderful character in that way, that she's just really loving and wonderful. And actually, Jean in the book, I was not expecting to find out how absolutely loving and wonderful she was. And I think part of the reason why I didn't expect it is when she's introduced as a character, she's like, falls into a lot of people's beds, or if there's no bed available, I guess one of the ambulances, etc. Seemingly. But I think a lot of what had her behaving that erratically was actually her being with Trace.
Actually, not only is that 100% true, Jean has her own story, which I'm actually in the middle of writing, and it's called Con.
Oh, cool.
It's the prequel to Red Light. It's that story.
I'm glad you're doing that because, when I've read it more than once, and one thing about your books, I almost don't want to continue on to the next chapter. I feel like I want to reread it to make sure, I got my brain over all like the cool stuff that's in there. And Jean really surprised me, and I loved the scene where, they were celebrating Jean at her house. And one of the things that really stuck with me, because I'm Irish too, I'm a McMullen, was Jean's dad saying, 1 drink and they're all happy, 2 drinks and they're deaf, and 3 drinks, they're all Lord of the Dance.
My beloved wife is Irish and Italian. So, and of course, Staten Island is kind of, there's a lot of mixes here, but there's a lot of Irish, there's a lot of Italian. Uh-huh. So you're sort of, and if you're in New York, you end up being everything by default anyway. So if you have no familiarity with Irish culture or Irish style, really is what it comes down to, then you don't live here, do you?
No. And the thing that I'm only 35, actually 36 in a couple weeks. But one of the things that I've learned, that if you've grown up in what I'd say is like an immigrant household, whereas my grandfather's parents met in Hoboken, okay. And they're both from Croatia. And my family, up until this summer, we've always lived in Hoboken. We sold the house, in July. But that said, I was used to growing up in a multi-layered household with several different generations and a lot of really interesting characters. And then, I watched My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and there's that crazy grandmother talking about, like, the Turks. And I had a crazy great grandmother, widowed, black clothing, completely senile by the time I was born. And I was like, I have one of those. So like seeing that kind of thing, I'm like, oh my God, we all like whether it's Irish, which I am also Irish, and my father's side of the family grew up in New York and Harlem. So like I have the Irish thing going on, but the more, I guess old world experience I had was the Croatian thing.
Well, it's funny. I myself am first generation on my mother's side. My mom's from South America.
Okay.
So, in fact, she's from Peru, kind of like Tori. Mm-hmm. In fact, and I spent a couple of years there as a kid and whatnot. And it was always my observation that, my brother and my sister and I, we were set apart from our peers who were second and third generation. Mm-hmm. We're third generation, or maybe even fourth on my dad's side. But, like I said, definitely first on my mom's. And it gives you a very unique take on culture, on family, on interaction. And I've been lucky enough, and it saved my sanity a little bit, to realize that it wasn't just my family that was crazy. This is everybody who's not from here is crazy. You notice like these traditional American families, nobody's like that.
Oh, like the whole nuclear family thing. Shockingly, a few years ago, I went to a youth ministry. I can't believe they put somebody like me there, but they wanted me, because I was one of the young folks in church, and one of the things that they were having a difficulty was keeping young people in church. Usually people come back, once they get married and have children, but there's like this huge gap about, my generation. And we're sitting down, and this guy was giving a talk about like Generation X and Generation Y and all the different things that made particular generations act in a way. And I was like, I can't relate to the Generation X or Y that they're presenting, because I did not grow up in a one-family environment. Like I lived in the house where my mother grew up in, and my grandparents had the first 2 floors and we had the second 2. And across the street was my grandfather's brother and his 3 kids and his wife. And I was like, I don't know how to relate to that. That's not what I grew up in, and therefore I didn't have a lot of the same thoughts. But like you were saying with New York, Moonstruck's another perfect example of...
I love that movie.
I love that movie.
Love that movie. Whew. And that quote, I love how you snap out of it.
Yeah.
I've had that repeated to me 1,000 times, because they were like, my family saw that, we watched it together, they started laughing hysterical and pointing at me, and they're like, that's you, and I'm like, shut up.
Now, for me, like what stuck with me was Nicolas Cage, and sticks in my head. Love is not perfect. It ruins your life. It breaks your heart. Now get in my bed.
Get me the knife, the big one.
This is the most tormented man I have ever met.
You're a wolf.
Love that movie.
Are we going to keep this in the...
Yeah, of course. Pop culture. What's the matter, you culture? What was interesting about the casting was like there were Greek people, there were Jewish people, all of them coming together, to have this Italian film. But what it links into what we were talking about earlier, as in, it's the immigrant experience. It's the, firsthand or, first generation or close to that experience. Are you moving into the house? No, we're going to sell the house. Don't sell the house. Why don't you move in? Pop don't like Johnny.
It's in psychology terms, it's called enmeshment. Mm-hmm. It's considered unhealthy, to a degree. Some communities obviously have it much stronger than the others. Look at the Amish, look at the Gypsy communities. They're extremely enmeshed to the point where people don't have individual identity. And if you try, they will do hurtful, harmful things to you. Mm-hmm. Our enmeshment is more along the lines of If your friends jump off the bridge, are you going to jump off with them? Mom, I just want to hang out at the mall. I just want to try a new shade. I just want to. Can I wear jeans? My friends wear jeans. I want to wear jeans. Can I wear jeans like my friends? You look like a hua. Yeah.
My grandmother was separate she's from Oklahoma and grew up during the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl. And my mom and dad were hippies. And my grandmother was...
I have to say that right here now. I'm sorry to interrupt you. That is cool.
Yes.
Although I'm surprised you're not an accountant.
Yes, I am not an accountant, but my grandmother, who grew up so poor, was appalled when my mom wanted to put patches on perfectly good clothing.
You look like you're poor.
What are you doing? So, yeah, it was interesting, growing up in...
Your life. Sorry.
It's okay. You ruin it. What are you doing? What are you going out in public like this? I can buy you perfectly good new things. Why are you wearing this? I'm like, okay, circling back into Red Light, what shocked me when because I read Red Light first and Punk Like Me second, it knocked the wind out of me when I found out that Carrie had been with Nina. I'm like, what the hell? And then I read Punk Like Me, which was about when they were growing up together. How did you come up with this concept, the Punk Like Me, that actually grew into several different books?
Well, Punk Like Me started as a challenge. I was working in a production department, and we had a lot of downtime in between crazy time. Mm-hmm. And they greatly encouraged us to do whatever we wanted, anything, during the day when we had downtime, because that's the only way to keep creatives at their best, is to let them be creative. And if there's nothing for them to be working on, do something. So I love to read. Love to read. And at that time, fan fiction for Xeno was like at its height. Mm-hmm. And I'd read a lot of it. Because it was the first time I'd actually gotten to read stuff that I personally found validating. Mm-hmm. In terms of, being a lesbian, being in love, being married, being sexual, all of those things, the trials and travails and triumphs of couplehood. Mm-hmm. And I ended up reading of Drag Kings and the Wheel of Fate.
Great book. Smith. Great book.
Oh my God, awesome stuff. And at first I remember it was online. And I read this book, and suddenly I realized that I could tell my story, a story that was in me to have. And a couple of things kind of all came together. Smitty's use of prose is phenomenal. I've always said that it's prose is poetry, or poetry is prose. It's the first thing I always say. And the second was the honesty that was revealed in that story, from its spirituality to its sexuality and its entirety, was so vulnerable, so open, so authentic that, like I said, it sparked something for me. Mm-hmm. So that was like one ingredient. Then another ingredient was I had a story that I'd wanted to write for a very long time. And I had submitted it to a couple of major places, all of whom had said, this is an awesome story. Too bad your main character is gay.
Oy.
Okay? And the one person who actually gave me the kindest advice, and I don't mind saying who it is, and you'll probably never hear this, but that's all right. David Hartwell, mm-hmm. who is the granddaddy and the god, of sci-fi literature, Mm-hmm. He's at Tor, and he's just, he's just phenomenal figure in literature and sci-fi fantasy specifically. And he sent me this letter after reading both my synopsis and my first couple of chapters, and he said, "This is a great story. The world is not ready for a lesbian hero. Keep writing."
Ah.
So I kept writing. And what happened was, I was like, well, nothing's ever going to come of this story. What would happen if I took the fantastical elements of this story and put it in our world? Mm-hmm. Well, what is a better metaphor for hell than high school?
Yes, you know? And Catholic school at that. I'm a survivor. I went to an all-girl Catholic school. The other thing, sorry to interrupt, that had my Jesus going. I was like, they're swimmers. I'm a swimmer.
And nobody talks about the swim team,
But that's what stuck in my head. I'm like, oh my God. Because I ended up, I was captain senior year, but only because there was only me and one other girl who lasted. For some reason, all the girls who started with me when, I graduated in 94, started with me, they all kind of got weeded out to the point where there was only 2 of us left, whereas other years had several people. And, one of the reasons why our team was so strong was because there was a lot of depth. There were the first place people. There were, the superstars, the one who made all the records. But there were a lot of us second and third and fourth place people who had draw in the stuff. So this is the first time I've ever read a book, and I'm like, Catholic school and swim teams. Oh my God.
What's your stroke?
Okay, wait for it. Breaststroke. And then senior year, I figured out that I was actually good at distance freestyle. And I wish, I hated freestyle when I started. And I wish I figured out my freshman year, because when I was doing it senior year, I kept on finally placing and medaling. And I was like, I can't believe I figured this out the last year I'm doing this.
It takes its time, right? The breaststroke was my worst stroke. I felt like by the time I would hit, the second lap, I'm like, I'm going to drown.
That's butterfly for me, by the way. Kerplunk, kerplunk, kerplunk. No, I can't figure this out.
Gorgeous, gorgeous stroke. The thing is that you feel, when you start doing fly, you feel great. 5 strokes in, you're like, can I stop? Please. I just make it stop. No way. Can I go back to, I'm a freestyler.
Yeah.
So, can I just go back to the Australian crawl? Thank you. And that's why they call it the crawl, because you've been doing fly, and now you're exhausted, and you've got nothing left, so you're just going to crawl on home. So
that's what I mean. And the other thing that I liked about Punk Like Me was that it showed the evolution of I'm young and I'm learning to be cool. In the moments where Nina would be like, yeah, I'm just going to relax and look like I'm cool while I'm freaking out.
Well, what's really funny is that, Nina's not obsessed with being cool, as in being a hipster or anything along those lines.
Oh, not a hipster, not at all.
She's not a poser. She's really concerned about, it's funny because she's concerned about how other people feel. Mm-hmm. And not necessarily in terms of what they think about her per se, so much as that she doesn't want to hurt them, or offend them, or, her stuff with Carrie notwithstanding, because let's face it, everybody's self-conscious when they're dealing with someone they're attracted to, and if you're not, then there's a problem with you, Mm-hmm. Honestly, if you don't have any sort of nerves or whatever when you're dealing with another person, you're probably psychotic. And everybody else should stay away from you.
You and your flat affect ass needs to get out, pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. That means that you're probably, one of those sociopaths we know as a narcissist. Mm-hmm. Kind of like Trace.
Oy, Trace.
I would say she was probably BPD with, comorbid with narcissism. But hey,
she just, she's just so, pathological. Just watching her and how she interacts with people and manipulates people. And I think one of the most terrifying things about her, and I think it was Jean had said this, is that there are no safe words with Trace. She will not ask your permission.
She'll take what she wants.
Oh my God, so terrifying. And that the way that she ravaged Tori's body was just so horrifying to me. And But equally horrifying from Punk Like Me was when Nina's mother was whipping her ass because she was coming out as a lesbian. Like, really, you know, it was the most intense act of homophobia that I've really seen. And I can't imagine being a teenager going through that.
I'm glad that you can't imagine it.
I know it happens, obviously. You know, when I was a senior in college, you know, the Matthew Shepard thing happened.
I remember that very, very, very vividly. The whole Matthew Shepard thing is that it brought to national attention and hammered home for those of us who have witnessed or experienced or even afraid of the fact that people, when they're homophobic, they try to beat the gay out of you. Mm-hmm. You know, it is, you know, crime, you know, hate crimes against gays are that much more violent. You know, they just simply are. And I think that's, you know, that's why their own homophobia is such that they're trying to exterminate it from themselves.
And the thing about that, and, you know, I'm going to get into the Brandon Tina thing, is that there probably still exists, but what I remember over the past 15 years are people who gay panic, like, oh, I can beat the crap out of you and potentially kill you because it freaked me out that you were gay.
That was a legal defense for a long time.
I know, and you know, one of the most appalling things that had, you know, got its hooks in me was first I learned about Brandon Tina when Boys Don't Cry came out.
I had read about it in the Village Voice, I guess, sometime not too long after it had actually happened.
Yeah, and the thing for me, I was so enthralled with it. I actually saw it at the Quad Cinema in New York City. And it just really got to me. So I went online and I found out more, including the transcripts of the interviews. You know, the interview that the cop had with her and the appalling things that he said and asking her if things felt good or, you know, did he finger you? You know, things that were just so appalling and abusive and, you know, also saying things about being, you know, her being transgender and is she confused and it all seemed okay, you know, and, you know, she's the one who suffered and obviously there were two innocent bystanders involved with that as well. But that particular time, you know, in the late 90s was definitely, you know, horrifying. So when I was reading Punk Like Me, and I saw how brutal the beating Nina's mother was putting into her, and then threatening her later and saying, oh, we're going to call the cops and tell them this, that, and the other thing, and she lifts up her shirt. It's like, go ahead, call the cops, and let them see my body. And I was, ooh. Did you know, did Nina come out of the air, or were there people in your life that, you know, went through similar things? How did that form? Because it starts with her in her formative years, you know, and her realizing that she, you know, is attracted to women, and then her friendship with Carrie changing. But where did that come from? Well,
you know, I always get asked that question in a variety of formats, you know, and the bottom line is that you know, that's always the bottom line on that question. And my answer to that is, you know, if I say that, you know, it's real, you know, for some people that takes, or that it's personal, for some that takes away my ability as a writer. Mm-hmm. If I say that it's fiction, then that actually takes away from the reality. Mm-hmm. So my answer is that it's real, it happened, I am not revealing that person's identity.
Mm-hmm. You know, and that particular question that you've been asked obviously happened over and over again for not Boys Don't Cry, Stone Butch Blues.
Yes.
And I was in, I think it was at Amherst, he was giving a talk and a reading, and people were interested in, oh, is this about your life? Is this about what you experienced? And for those of you who have not read Stone Butch Blues, it it chronicles the life of a particular character who, when he was young, would wear masculine clothing, and then eventually, found his way into his first gay bars and what it was like in the 50s and then into the 60s and 70s as he was growing up. And it's a stark, extreme tale, and some absolutely horrific things happen, which also includes rape. And it's not an easy book, but it's a very important story. And obviously, because we're trying to find our history or herstory, depending on somebody's point of view, that as a gay woman, I was like, is this real? Did this happen to you? And not to give pity, but to give reverence towards it. So I can see it coming up when it comes to Punk Like Me as well.
Like, when it comes to our stories, as lesbians and as women, you can't separate those two. And despite the fact that a lot of people are uncomfortable with the word lesbian, it took me a long time to embrace that word myself. We are the bellwether and the canary in a coal mine for the status of women, period, end. So what happens to us is emblematic of what happens to women in general. Mm-hmm. Women's stories, and by now I mean women, all of us, who are, female identified. Mm-hmm. They are, not only are they important and critical, and sometimes completely horrific, and just the kind of damage that you just don't want to ever hear about one person experiencing. And yet so many of us mm-hmm. experience not only repeat trauma, but different types of trauma. They're also marginalized. Our stories are also marginalized. Mm-hmm. And these life-altering, character-changing, I hate to say that they're character-forming, because you know what? Nobody needs to be raped to have their character formed. Mm-hmm. Nobody needs to be beaten into almost death to have their character formed. That's not character-forming. That's erasing. Mm-hmm. And dead erasure. And these stories are so common that they're trivialized. Mm-hmm. Like, oh yeah, whatever, that happens to everybody. Unfortunately, yes, it does happen to a significant number of women. It's unfortunate. It's a tragedy. It's not, and having these stories where these tragedies are told, it gives voice to those who suffer in silence, mm-hmm. or who think maybe my story, it doesn't have that much meaning. My thing wasn't as bad as this, or my thing wasn't as bad as that. And there's no comparison between pain. You're in pain, you're in pain. The metaphor I like to use for that is the broken leg metaphor. Mm-hmm. You break your leg, okay? You're next to 100 other people who broke their legs. Guess what? It doesn't matter how you broke your leg. Your leg is broken. Mm-hmm. Now some people will require, more therapy or whatever than others. But you know what? There's a standard that in general, there's a standard sort of treatment and healing protocol. It's going to take about 6 weeks. It's going to take about this. It's going to take about that. And these traumas and these pains, they have that they have that commonality. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the things in women's studies classes that I had, and if you've taken any, it's a very high emotional environment. And one of the things that I guess about being young at the time is that it turns into a contest on whose experience is the most egregious, what level of oppression. My oppression is different than your oppression, or I don't want to be in a contest and whose pain is deep enough, or one along those lines. And growing up, and I didn't realize I liked girls until I was 19, but I'll tell you, I've been with quite a few women, and many of them had been raped, whether it's a family member molestation or whatever. And I don't think that I'm a magnet for it. I just think that it happens much more than people would like to admit. And one of the things in Red Light that really stuck to me was that notion that, Tori's notion that she fucked up somehow and brought something onto herself and ruined her relationship with somebody when she had been raped.
And it's funny, it's subtle, because there's this scene earlier in the book where, Tori expands, I think that it's her second time, if you would, with Trace. Mm-hmm. And there's that moment of decision. Should I, shouldn't I, what does she want? And Tori doesn't realize, because Tori has a different personality and different life experiences, she doesn't realize that she's actually been being abused since day one.
Yes.
She doesn't see it because she's already used to being emotionally used by her mother. So there's that scene that comes later where Tori just cries. And she doesn't even know why she's crying. She doesn't know why she's crying, but she's crying because even if you consciously are not aware that something's wrong, your subconscious knows this is not how things should be. And she's crying because she's being systematically, abused and raped, by Trace.
I think it's interesting to see, I like the way you wrote Nina and Samantha's reaction to that time when, the first time when she comes back to their home and her body is covered with bruises and gashes and all sorts of, angry scratches and whatnot. And they didn't say, what are you doing? Why are you with this person, that's treating you this way? Or, what's wrong with you? They're like, are you okay with this? Is what happened to your body, is that something that's okay with you? Rather than negating her or, telling her how she should feel about a situation or that she should never see this person again. They're trying to ask her in a way that still empowers her to make the choice about how she feels about something, rather than passing judgment and telling her how she needs to behave in the future.
Well, Tori, if you really examine the dynamics, it's an enmeshed family situation and that she comes from, which means that, that sense of self, is lacking. Mm-hmm. It's been lacking since day one. I mean, Tori is, as her mother says, you're my princess, but you've had to be the man of the house. Mm-hmm. So Tori's never a primary thought for herself. She's a secondary thought. Mm-hmm. And even, like I said, in that scene, which is not, do I want this, do I not want this? And by secondary scene, of course, I'm referring to that second encounter with Trace. Mm-hmm. She doesn't really ask, do I want this, do I not want this? She really goes with, what does she want? Mm-hmm. Do I make this person happy? So Tori's not present, if you would, in her own decision making. No. She's not there for those decisions because her decisions are always for others. So I think that Nina and Sam, obviously they've got a couple of years on Tori, and have probably been through therapy, and their own experiences, et cetera, and they are respectful too of a person's free will. Mm-hmm. Don't forget that thing about free will is the entire basis of Samantha's religious and spiritual system. Mm-hmm. So that there's no way that approach to Tori wouldn't include that absolute respect for her sense of self.
Yes. And also what I found interesting was when they found out who had abused her, Nina dropped the peroxide, but did not tell, immediately once they knew that it was Trace, oh, this girl is bad news, you need to stay away from her. I know her from way back, this can't end well, she didn't say anything. And in the end, she felt guilty about not saying anything. But I thought it was interesting in how much, the lack of manipulation in that conversation. They were just being there for her and present for her, but not, steering her around as to how she had to think about what had happened to her.
Well, it gave her room to make a decision for herself.
Exactly.
And I think in giving her that room, that's why you have that scene later where she just cries. Mm-hmm. Because, again, that part of us that has no words, that we call it the unconscious and we call it the subconscious. It's the part of our mind that had to be taught to speak. It gives us images and it gives us emotions, but it doesn't have words. We take the time to translate, if you would. That's that part coming out that's telling her there's something really wrong here. And even though she has no words, she has that space to feel.
Exactly. And another, Jean's character is an interesting vehicle from another perspective. And Jean is much more upfront about what happened to her and gets extremely serious when she finds out who had marked Tori up. And she, bared her soul to me by, opening up her shirt and showing the scar and says, does this stand for, me? No, this stands for her. This is Trace's mark on my body. And, that she's bad news and what she experienced. And she was able to vividly express a lot of the things that had happened to her and, try to give her a solid by telling her that, this is what happened to me. I was with her for 3 years. And you're going to wish that all it took that for you to get off was a beautiful girl and some time with her.
Well, I think that's, Jean's obviously, still haunted to a degree. I mean, she's certainly much more healed from then, but she's scarred, and the scar on the inside is bigger than the scar on the outside. I think that's the truth for most people. And I think that her being that upfront with Tori is also a way of her protecting herself. Because, if Tori gets involved with Trace and she and Jean are friends, then that's triggering. I'm sure you've heard that term used before. For people who have PTSD for whatever reason, things trigger.
Yes,
and I think that in doing Tori a favor, so to speak, by being that honest, Jean was also presenting a boundary and protecting herself. By basically saying this person's bad news, and and I actually like the way Jean presented it, in that she's like, I don't want to be involved with this person. I not even peripherally, because this is dangerous and this is bad.
Exactly. And the other thing, in terms of setting boundaries, when she and Tori were having that mutual interest, is, I'm not okay with sharing. And, it's not in Tori's nature to want to share either. She often overestimates what, like, the connection with the woman that she's with, whether it's Carrie or even Trace. But she's a good girl.
Yeah, she really is. She's not. Somebody had once written a review about Red Light, and they're like, and Tori's like, if the girl's hot, then why not? I'm like, no, Tori's not like that at all. Nina was like that. Tori's not. Tori is, in contrast, she's actually a lot more comfortable with sex in many, many ways. And there's reasons for that, for Nina, which will come out in other books as we go along. But, Tori's, she's like I said, she's sexually comfortable. She's comfortable with who she is. She's comfortable with her body. She's comfortable with being, alive and a healthy woman, and but she's also she's serially monogamous.
Yes.
She is sexual, yes, but all of her sexual encounters are within context of relationship, even with Trace.
Yeah,
that's why
absolutely.
For her.
And
she's monogamous.
Yes. And the other thing, that I want to get across in this interview as well is one of the reasons why I enjoy your writing is that it's very sex positive. it's raw and unapologetic and real and fun and celebratory. It's not, we're talking about some really important political aspects, social aspects of your writing. But what I also find fascinating, and one of the reasons why I wanted to interview you, was because of the rawness and how you approach sex scenes and how they're so vivid and real. You know, I thought the sex between Carrie and Tori was phenomenally hot, and using language that a lot of lesbian authors shy away from, including one of my favorite words, cunt. And, you know, I really liked the space that you've made it in your novels for that kind of intense, in-your-face, and very imaginatively phrased things that, you know, having on a rig instead of having, you know, a strap on, and all the different, you know, ways you refer to particular acts. Like one thought I thought was kind of funny was that, you know, she said that she was buffing her ass, which is another way of talking about, like, you know, rubbing up behind somebody, which I thought was incredibly cute. But one of the reasons why I ended up buying all your books, I did love the storyline and the serious stuff in it, and also the familial stuff, which I could relate to. But it's just so rare that you find really fun, raw sex in a novel. And, you know, I appreciated that.
Oh, thank you. I try to be very, very honest about everything I write. Mm-hmm. You know, so everything that I do in regards to character, especially with their sexuality, it's critical. There's not a word there that's not used for a reason. Mm-hmm. It's very revealing about who the characters are, how their relationship is. You know, Tori's language is different with each person she's with.
Yes,
you know,
so different with Jean. So different with Jean. You know, that's one of the things that I love, the contrast between, you know, even though Carrie wasn't the right woman for her, I thought that they had a healthy dynamic. But the sex that she had with Jean was just so different and so much more beautiful and healthier, I think, for Tori to have somebody like Jean.
Well, you know, they're in love. You know, it's not to, you know, sound too corny. Not that I actually care, but that's true love. True love isn't, you know, petals and flowers and, you know, purple prose. You know, true love is you know, wet and hard and fuck. You know, if that's your language, and that's what your erotic context is. You know, true love is raw. Mm-hmm. And it is, when I say dirty, I don't mean dirty in the sense of you know, meaning to be clean. I mean, it's gritty. It gets down to it, you know. That's something actually I talk about in Glass Lions, you know. Mm-hmm. You know, like, we use the word fuck for everything. And I'm a Brooklynite, so I can drop the F-bomb like you wouldn't believe. And I can, you know, there's a saying somebody keeps posting up every now and again on Facebook. Uh-huh. You know, it says, you know, I don't just curse. I enunciate like a fucking lady.
Yes.
You know, I love that. Yes, I enunciate like a fucking lady. You know, so.
Speaking about enunciating, you agreed to do a little reading for us. Yes, from Core, which is a new project of yours. Could you talk about that a bit before you start the reading?
Sure. Core is a series of novellas, for lack of a better word. They incorporate art into it, so it's it's a new take on the book. Mm-hmm. You know, Alliance Press puts the art back into the art storytelling. Mm-hmm. So it's not a graphic novel, because it's not a story told in sequential pictures. Mm-hmm. It's more like a scrapbook. You're getting to read Nina's diary. Oh, I like that. Thanks. It's a lot of fun. So, you know, you get to see things like, you know, posters that she's kept, and coasters, and, you know, napkins that she's written set lists on, and postcards, and pictures that she takes, and sketches that she does on the back of, you know, those paper placemats, and, you know, Core's a series, and The first one, Volume 1, Issue 1, is actually subtitled Real Men Don't Wear Plaid. And these are the stories that didn't make it into Punk and Zen.
Ah.
So it's all that in-between stuff, the stuff that it's really great stories, but if you were to put it in a book, you'd still be reading that book. Mm-hmm. So, and core for several reasons, because it's the core of Nina, and it's, it's a bit of a pun on the French word core for heart.
Uh-huh.
So.
Oh, yeah, sacre core.
Exactly. So, core, and hardcore, punk, the whole, it's a real big play on all of that, mm-hmm. and it means all of that. Mm-hmm. So, Volume 1, Issue 1 came out last year. I was going to have Volume 2 last month, but unfortunately we had a hurricane.
Oh, dear.
So, sorry, not Volume 2, Issue 2 was going to be next month, but so it's actually going to be, it's in pre-sale right now. Mm-hmm. So people are going to get it in January, for those who've done the pre-sale part, and it's all those in-between stories, and not just for, punk like me and Punk and Zen, but also for Glass Lions. It's continuing Nina's point of view with all those things that we don't get to see.
Exactly. I conceptually, I really like the integration of, the visual along with the actual textual things. What you had spoke about earlier with Drag Kings and the Wheel of Fate, I remember reading it and thinking, God, I need to read more, because it was so intelligent, and it was, I at one time thought of myself as well-read, and I felt like, oh God, I need to go back to college again and read some more, because I want to sound as smart as these characters do.
I need to study the classics.
Yes. I want Rhea to pick out some books for me to read.
Again, you'd still be reading.
I would still be reading.
So, isn't that a great thing, though, about being a reader, is that you can always pick up a new book?
It's true.
There's always something you haven't read. There's always something to learn. There's always something to glean, wisdom and insight from. That's the great thing about being a reader, that, you have a history of books, of literature, and it's all there. It's just finding the time. Mm-hmm.
So are you ready to lay a reading on us?
Yeah, it's be a little short. All right, so this is a scene that in Punk and Zen is summed up in about 3 lines, where, Jared goes home, Steph's already gone home, and Nina's just about to take off for Madrid. So, this is part of what happened in that scene, where we know that Jared has ended up with an injury and a broken wrist. Just then, the doctor walked in. "Ah, Mr. Jones," he greeted. "You've broken your wrist, I see." The medico spoke an announcement, all of them in completely perfect, unaccented whatsoever English. It was so flat, it was a little creepy, actually. Jess sat up a little bit and tried to appear both nonchalant yet terribly interested without being upset. "Yeah, that's what they told me a little while ago," he answered, lifting his slung arm a bit. But what about the tendon?" Damn, he was brave. He went right to the heart of it. The doctor gave him a sympathetic smile, then smoothed the wave in his hair before he replied. "Well, there is mixed news here," he said in the same flat and creepy lack of accent. "The good news? The tendon is not torn, but," and here he knit his eyebrows together and looked very grim, "there may be a rupture. There is swelling in the sheath. I'm afraid it's going to be painful for quite some time, my young friend." Jared's lip thinned to tiny black lines as he swallowed that bitter pill. He nodded in understanding, but I could see the blank shock that would set in soon. I recognized it. I blinked a bit. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't, because it wasn't my right to it. It was Jared's, and if he wouldn't, hell, I wasn't going to either. This was his life, his whole life on the line. Fuck the tour. What about his dreams? What about his future? "Here's the medication you should take for pain," the doctor said as he handed Jared a little paper cup. "When the nurse comes in a few minutes to check you before you can go, there'll be more paperwork for you to fill and to bring to your doctor at home where you can pursue further treatment. Your girlfriend can help you." Right. That was what we'd said so I could stay with Jared in the hospital. Pain and confusion might have been a part of the moment, but Jared couldn't resist. Yes, I'm sure my girlfriend will be very happy to help me. I'm a very lucky guy. Jer smirked evilly at me. Jerk, I mouthed at him and tried not to either roll my eyes or shake my head. Well, at least the sense of humor was still intact, I figured. The doctor, satisfied with what he'd said and done, turned to leave, but there was still an important question to ask. "Excuse me, doctor?" I blurted as he reached the door. "Yes?" He turned back, brow arched in question. You know, I decided then and there I wasn't going to do that so much anymore. It was pretty darn annoying. And besides, it seemed everyone in Europe did it. Maybe I'd do something new, like stick my tongue out or some such. But I'll worry about that later. There were much more important things to think about at the moment. "Will he be able to play?" I asked the doctor, only to receive a bemused look in return. "Play," I repeated, waving his good hand. "Yes, you know," I demonstrated playing air guitar. "Play!" The doctor nodded in understanding, and it was the disappearance of his non-committal smile that was the worst part. He stared down at the papers before him as he spoke. "Not for a while, and certainly not before physical therapy," he answered. He shuffled some papers on his clipboard. "Well, you take care, young man," he said finally as he walked to the door. "And you too, young lady." The door swung shut behind him. "Fucking great," Jerkster said to the ceiling. "I'm gonna have to be some stupid fucking shithead bus driver." I said nothing. There was nothing to say, and this was Jer's moment, to feel, to decide. Anything I said wouldn't have helped. "Nina, I'm going home. I'm just going to be a drag on the tour. Can't even help tune or carry anything." He sighed, resignation blowing off him. "Besides," he said and gave me a small grin, "I miss fast food and TV." I laughed a little because I understood. Not because I miss fast food, but because I did miss my world. I missed the studio, and I missed the bar, and I missed the sound voices I'd grown up with. I missed people cursing at each other on the street in that unique New York City accent. I missed dirty water dogs and knishes. I missed the damn subway. But mostly, I missed people. My parents, my brother, my sister. I missed Fran, but I tried very hard not to think of her at all. She had cut me off so completely, and it hurt so much. Hell, I even missed my annoying sort of supervisor, Jen, and her constant needling. Now that's really homesick. I refused to even think of Samantha at all, because when I did, feeling the way I already did about Fran, the combination made me hurt like I was bleeding. And for right now, so far as I was concerned, I'd already bled enough.
Wow.
And that's it.
I like that because, as readers, especially for me as a reader, I get so attached to the characters that there's no better news than an author telling me, "I'm going to let you know just a little bit more about these characters that you love." So I dig it. I dig the concept a lot. There's
Awesome.
one other thing that I wanted to ask you about when it comes to your chapter titles.
Yes.
And I was in Punk Like Me, it's a little different. It seems like there's sometimes lyrics or allusion to something that's going to happen in the chapter. Whereas Red Light, there were aspects of a manual. And you wouldn't think that little details that you'd have to know as an EMT about how to deal with particular situations would lend itself to such a great analogy or an allusion to what was going to happen in the chapter. And for me, I want to know, was it the chicken or was it the egg? What came first, the titles or the chapters?
I know what my chapters are going to be. I know what my stories are going to be. I know what I want them to do. I know what I want them to say. So the chapters come first. Now, each book is obviously they're different, so I use a different sort of technique. When I was, when I came up with the concept for Red Light and I knew the story, what I was going to say, what I was going to do, how I was going to do it, I was like, this would be perfect. This is a great way to divide the chapters.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And it was just, obviously I've been an EMT for way too long, and it just, there was no better way for me to honor that heritage and that schooling and the people who taught me and all of that than by making it a literal part of the story. That this is the story. This is how it works.
Yeah, for me, reading them, it gave me a context as to what I could expect, not simply foreshadowing, but, it's a diagnostic tool. There was information that you needed to make a decision or how to interpret information in order to treat a patient. And I thought it lent really well to what was going on in that particular chapter because it gave me a framework. How should I look about, circulation or, oxygen or whatever it is. Are you getting what you need in order to survive? I really appreciated that as a kind of a heads up before I started the chapter. Oh, how is she going to use this particular snippet? How is this foreshadowing? How is this going to play out in terms of the relationships of the people? And I thought it was a great device.
Thank you. I'm glad that you did it. I enjoyed doing it, and it was, again, there could not have been a better marriage, in terms of, a novel and these actual steps. Those are the actual steps I learned.
Yeah.
And that we all learn, and that they modify it every now and again, whatever, but, all those old school EMTs who, that's how we learned.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. I want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing the little snippet of Core and talking about fun things like Moonstruck and our favorite little quotes, and also talking about some really serious stuff.
Well, thank you for having me and for being able to talk about that broad range of things. And I'm so glad you had that appreciation for Moonstruck.
Yes. And I was going to play it for a friend of mine. And I turned it on and I'm so enthralled and I've been to the Met, I've seen La Boheme and, I know those streets. I know that attitude, if you're so brilliant, why do you have butter on your tie? These things resonate with me, and I realize psychotically that they mean a lot more to me than they do some folks who don't understand it. The true funniness is when you've seen this, you've experienced this, you know these people. So, yeah.
Loretta, do y'all love him?
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there's no better way to sign off a perfectly fun interview. So thanks again for coming on the show, JD.
Oh, gosh, thanks for having me, Liz. I greatly appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Super. Okay. And good night, Gracie.